think regularly asking yourself the question, why am I doing this? Just pausing and reflecting on that. I think we're all here for a God-given purpose. And if you can align yourself to why you were put on this earth, what is the purpose that you're here for, and is what you're currently doing aligning to that in some way? If it is, great, do more. If it's not, change.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Build It to Billions podcast, where we guide successful entrepreneurs and investors on their journey from millions to billions. We believe that the key to scaling your business and compounding your wealth starts every single day with a mindset and practice of stewardship over ownership and applying billionaire biblical principles. Our ultimate goal to help you scale and compound your wealth and life so you can give more or all of it away to help MVPs. I'm your host today, Brett Sorts. In each and every episode, we feature some of the world's top entrepreneurs, millionaires, and billionaires. They share their principles, values, secrets, and wisdom, providing each of us with the insights we need to reach the next level of success, faith, and impact. I'm excited about our next guest. She's out of the great state of Texas, and she is an author, innovator, consultant, and she really focused on bridging the gap between human connection and innovation. She has an amazing book called Cake on Tuesday, 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation, and she has a heart for really helping us as entrepreneurs move to the next level of scale and impact. In fact, today we're going to be talking about stepping away to scale your business to billions. She has been named Topple's top 10 influential female pioneers in technology, and she has been featured on Forbes, Bloomberg, International Business Times, Tech Times, and Women in Business, and so much more. Please welcome to the show with me, Elizabeth Bieniek. Elizabeth, how are you doing?
Thanks, Brett. Awesome to be here.
Hey, grateful to have you. And for our listeners getting to know you for the first time, would you give us just a little bit more about your story and your current focus?
Sure. I have a very unique and circuitous path to where I am now. I started out in working in higher education, actually, for helping people in entrepreneurship and moving to the next level, and then made a significant pivot moving into high tech. I would like to say I fell into high tech, and I spent the first several years saying I'm not a tech person, which is somewhat ironic considering as you mentioned in my intro, I've been named as an influential tech pioneer. But I think being open to opportunities and open to where very divine appointments can take you, I ended up on a interesting path that led me into strategy, looking at long-term future for Cisco was the company I was working at the time. And that led me into really poking holes at what are we doing and how are we setting ourselves up for the future? How do we make sure that we're relevant, not just next year, but 5, 10, 15 years from now? And that led to a opportunity to build a breakthrough product in the augmented reality space that was focused at the time on holographic interactions and how do you make virtual meetings even more real, to bring people together. And I ended up leading a startup inside of a big tech for several years to bring that to fruition.
Amazing. I love that. And by the way, if you want to learn more about Elizabeth, you can go to her website, elizabethbieniek.com, elizabethbieniek.com. I'm going to spell that for you because it's not as simple as you might think. That the last name is Bieniek.com. Elizabeth is spelled just like you would think it would be spelled. Okay, cool. So before we dive into the topic at hand, which is simply stepping away to scale to billions, I want to take one other step back. I believe we've all been given certain gifts in this life, and these gifts have been given us to be a blessing and help to others. So what would you say is Elizabeth's, one or two superpowers that she has, and how does that help how she helps and bless people today?
Sure. I think the ability to create order out of chaos is something that is definitely one of my superpowers and a God-given ability because it's not something I could naturally do. But the ability to look at big, messy things, whether that be an organization, a group of people, a project, whatever the case is, and figure out what is the thread that binds through this and how do we group things in logical ways to help move that forward. The second thing I would say is the ability to then rally a group of people to move forward on that vision. There's only so much you can do as a single person, but together with a group of people, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2. It's very exponential. So the ability to then rally people around a goal and move forward and keep them excited and motivated and understand how they're a part of that whole. I would say that's the second area I've had success.
Perfect. Awesome. With that in mind, let's talk about the topic at hand, stepping away to scale to billions. So, Elizabeth, you worked with a lot of entrepreneurs in business and Fortune 100 companies. So what would you say the top experts in their field or the heads of companies what's the number one secret to stepping away so they can, scale from where they're at to even higher levels?
I think that simple humility of recognizing that you don't know everything, and that's okay. You were never meant to know everything or be the expert in all areas. So I have a chapter in my book called Make Room for Interpretation, and it's really focused on honing in on the members of your team and understanding the uniqueness that each of them brings to the table. And as a leader, you have to be very proactive in that. You can't just rely on people. I mean, you asked me what my superpowers are, and that's a great question to ask people. And sometimes people are really good at identifying that, but sometimes people really struggle with that because they can identify those in other people, but in themselves, it can be a real challenge. I think part of being a leader is calling forth those gifts in the people that surround you and that work for you, and identifying the areas of amazingness that they might not even know or maybe haven't had an opportunity to cultivate yet, and pulling that forward. I think when you make that room for interpretation, oftentimes you're hiring somebody for a specific role. We need to fix this issue, we need to fill this role. But realizing as you're bringing somebody in, they might be able to do that one thing that you brought them on for, but they're much more well-rounded and multifaceted and capable than that. So when you make room for interpretation, you're really looking at what else could they bring to the table? And what are these unique combinations of maybe they have no background in this one area, but they have interest or a natural inclination or just a gifting for it, and they have some really good input and advice. How do you encourage that and cultivate that? And I think that's when you really start growing a team of superheroes.
Awesome. Okay. I think I'm capturing that. It sounds like, encouraging, looking for, being humble enough to know that you don't have all the answers, which we don't. And then B, we don't also have all the superpowers or the gifts, which we don't. And discovering, helping your team members discover that and then to bring that forward. Is that a fair summary so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Excellent. What's the number two secret to, creating an environment to step away, to scale to billions or scale and grow your business?
I said the next thing, once you have identified that, is really setting up a process and a culture that you can empower your team to move forward in those giftings. I have another chapter in my book called Empowered Teams Power Through. And it's really focused on, once you've drawn out those skills and identified that, make sure that you're building a culture that rewards people stepping forward in those giftings. A lot of times leaders will say something like, oh, I have an open door policy, and then are never available. So what they're actually saying contradicts with their words when their actions don't line up. So making sure that you have a process and a culture that really rewards that. And as the leader, you need to show that first. I think people will definitely look more at what you do than what you say. So when you make sure that your actions align with your words in that. So once you have created an environment and called out gifting and say, hey, you're great at this, I'd like to see more of that, make sure you reward them, because the first couple times they do that, they might fail. It's new. They're exercising a new skill. So make sure that you have an environment that is rewarding the journey and the effort along the way and the learnings along the way. And there's absolutely no wrong outcome if you're learning from it. So when your culture and your system back that up, I think that's when you start seeing people feel more confident in moving in their giftings and more comfortable giving more and more of themselves.
Yeah, I have this framework that I've been working on and trying to encourage my team, which is, hey, what's your unique gift, right? Mm-hmm. And then not just being satisfied with that, but actually maximizing the potential of that gift, right? So encouraging a culture of leadership and growth in that gifting, right, in that area. Right. And then the next part is how do I make a maximum impact to help as many people as I can with that gift? And then the overarching kind of theme to all of it is knowing there's a bigger reason for why I'm here. Right? It's not just for the job. It's like it is. We believe a calling is divine and is urgent, right? And it's something that's going to make an impact for generations to come. And so you combine all of those things, and that actually equals fulfillment, right? It's that kind of framework.
100%.
But each of them are so very important. You drop one of those, right? If it's just about your gift and you're not maximizing the potential, then you lose out on fulfillment. Or if it's about those two, but you're not maximizing the number of people you can touch and the lives you can change, then you're losing fulfillment. And or if you're not knowing that the vision is bigger than just us as the team, us as individuals, then we're also losing that. Any thoughts on that kind of framework, or what would you adjust?
100%. You definitely have to align to the why, because at the end of the day, we're all here for a reason, and we want to be doing something big. We want to contribute. We want to belong. We want to be part of something greater than ourselves. So when you can align the why of an individual to the why of an organization or mission of your charter, that's when you get the most impact. Because as an organization, you now have people who want to give so much more because they're plugged into that why, and they're getting fulfillment through what they're doing in a day-to-day basis. So it's now aligned to their personal mission, and they're seeing movement forward and the ability to do more with many. And you start getting that amazing contribution from an organization. From the individual, one of the biggest things we talk about running an organization is stickiness and keeping people and retention, and how do you keep them happy. When they're aligned to a mission and a cause that really resonates with them personally, you can't beat that. There's no health perks or gym memberships or anything that's going to compete with that. So from an employee perspective, they are plugged in. They're all in. And so you get that amazing connection on both sides. And that's when you can really do amazing things as a team.
Yeah, it really feels like the purpose and the why are aligned as much as close or intertwined or coming together, right? You're thinking in an ideal world, each team member's purpose and why they're calling is also fitting into the large organization's, purpose. And it's a big part of that to move that forward. It's kind of what I'm hearing, right? Am I off on that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't have to be 100% to 100%. It can be some facet of it. I mean, you're never going to find a whole team of people that's going to be aligned to every possible facet of your organization, but they could be super passionate about one area, and that could be one of your core principles, operating principles. So great, find alignment there, and that absolutely works.
Excellent. And then what would you say is the best way for the leader to discover each team member's individual, whys and purpose and we call it like a compass, right? Of where they're going and what they have their vision for their 1, 3, 5, 10-year plan. Like besides walking them through those types of exercises, or maybe do you have other ways to encourage that process to understanding what that is?
I find coffee to be very helpful. Most of the teams that I've worked with have been virtual, so they've been spread all over the globe, different geographies. If you have the ability to sit down with somebody one-on-one and share a drink, break some bread, that is absolutely the best way. But if you can't, virtual coffee is amazing. I would definitely have virtual coffee with my team. At least I'd shoot for once a quarter. Each person on my team try to just sit down for the agenda was virtual coffee. We're not trying to get through, here's your 5 goals. Here's the things we have to do this quarter. It's just a conversation. And I think if you really want to get to know somebody, you have to slow down. You have to have those conversations where there isn't a plan. It's not okay, we've got to get through these 10 things in 25 minutes and we're out of here. Spend an hour if you can and let them talk. And this comes back down to the core tenets of communication. My undergrad was in English, and I think everything goes back to communication in my mind. But you have to ask those open-ended questions. You have to share some things of yourself, but then you have to wait. You have to be quiet. You have to listen. And oftentimes you have to let that pause get a little awkward. That's when you get to the really good stuff. That's when people are like, okay, she really wants to know. Okay, maybe I will say more. She's not going to cut me off looking at her phone, jump to the next thing. Slow down and have those get to know you conversations about what are you enjoying about what you're doing right now? What do you wish we could do more of? Do you have thoughts about how we could do this better? And then just be quiet and listen. And people will share, when they know you genuinely want to know, they will share their thoughts and opinions. And you can find nuggets of gold in that, both for your organization and for the individual.
Okay, this is awesome. I'm loving it. Very practical and very helpful. And again, if you want to learn more about everything that Elizabeth Bieniek is doing, you can go to elizabethbieniek.com. You can also check out her book, 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. It's called Cake on Tuesday. And we promise we'll share what that means here later in the show. But we're continuing on here. Okay, so it sounds like so far you start with a humble mindset, making room for interpretation, understanding each gift of yourself, but also each gift of your team members, right? Calling those things forward and encouraging that, making the team member the hero, right? As well as setting up a process and culture that empowers them to step into that and to share openly and reward the journey and align with the team, which is cool. And hopefully align the purpose and the why. And then the next thing is actually setting meetings, right? Where you are discovering and or updating, right? Because you can't establish just because you hired someone a year or two ago that the same why and purpose is still there, right? So don't take that for granted.
People change.
Yeah. So what is the next step in the process to making sure that we can scale, stepping away to scale to billions?
I think this last one here is really important to people that are trying to scale to that next level. And it's probably one of the hardest things to do is protect yourself, is taking that time and making that space for quiet reflection. Make sure you're still aligned to where you want to go. Turn everything off, unplug, get outside, spend those times thinking through how are things going? How am I? Do that health check, that gut check. Has my vision changed? Is where I want to go different from where it was a few months ago, a year ago? And what are the things I'm doing right now that are moving forward towards that? What are the things that are giving me joy? And what are the things that I really need to make those hard calls and cut? A lot of times we look at that pause as a luxury. And it is not a luxury. It is 100% essential, because otherwise you're going to burn out. You're going to miss your mission. You're going to go too hard and too fast in the wrong direction. You're not going to be there for your team because you're not there for yourself. So I think really prioritizing that ability to protect yourself, not just as a luxury or an afterthought, but as an absolute necessity, because you can never be there for your team or your business if you're not first there for yourself.
That's so good. Yeah. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. I think, how am I doing? How has my vision changed? What's bringing me joy? What needs to change? Having those times of reflection. I know one thing I've been practicing is Sabbath, like on the Friday at 7 p.m., everything goes off until Saturday at 7 p.m. So that's from our whole family. And we find that time slows down, things calm down. Like it's a peaceful 24 hours. I'm like, wow, this makes a ton of sense. And at first you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll skip this weekend or maybe or this or that. But it's like every time I do it, I'm always so glad I did. And it helps me to clarify all the things you're saying there to slow down. So what have you found besides something like a Sabbath that the best, leaders are doing in order to create that space? Whether it be scheduling, whether it be a location, whether it be, what are some of the best ideas for that?
Yeah, actually putting it on your calendar is huge, and doing it during your work week is huge. For me personally, a lot of times I would take time on a Monday morning, and sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 2 hours, sometimes it's 4 hours, sometimes it's 8 hours. Sometimes the busier the phase that I'm going through, the more time I'd need in that pause. But I used to block it and just call it planning. It's just planning. But that's the time I turn off all the electronics, and you can determine in advance what that time frame is that works for you. For me, I love just getting the pen and paper out. So no electronics, and just jotting things down. I'm a big visual person, so I have to lay things out. I did this when I wrote my book. I wrote down the different sections and just laid them all out on the floor. Where's the order in this pattern? Where's the pattern in this chaos? And finding that. And I think sometimes when you take that different perspective, that really helps. The other thing is just, this is not novel. People have said this for ages, but it's so true, of physically change your geography. Sometimes that could just be get out of your office. It could be as simple as go outside, go to the park, go to the backyard, go somewhere else. Sometimes you have to take a trip, do whatever the case is, but physically changing your geography, there's something about that just jogs us mentally and gets us to a different point. We get a very different perspective on the problems that we're facing in the day-to-day. So I think those two things are huge, of just unplug for a bit and block that time and then go outside.
Okay. I love it. All right, great. So what questions haven't I asked so far that you're like, oh, Brett, here are one or two other ideas about again, stepping away. And in some ways you're saying stepping away and step into, right? It's this timing and this rhythm, right? Some ways it's stepping away to let your team members, in humility, not having to control so many things. And other times it's stepping in emotionally. So maybe that's what we're saying here. Like sometimes you got to step away, control and tactically, and you got to step in emotionally and connect with the team and help them to ignite that, but also yourself too, right? Getting away from the tactical and then going into the emotional and the vision in that part of it, right? Am I catching on anything here, or what do you think on that?
Absolutely. That actually spurred another thought of another piece of this I think about is the idea of pruning your feedback loops. So it's the whole concept of be careful who you're listening to, and that might change in different seasons. So in your last phase, your last milestone, you might have had certain counselors or people that are speaking into where you're at. But if you're going to the next level, you might need different people to weigh in. And you have to be careful if some people who have limiting beliefs or have only made it so far are now speaking to your future. that can have a big impact, even if you don't realize it. You're not even consciously taking that. You are in some ways internalizing that. So I think that ability to constantly look at, who are my counselors, who's speaking into my life right now, are they aligned with where I want to go, and are there any feedback loops I need to prune for this next season to get me to that next level? I think that's part of that as well.
Okay, I like that. Let's dig into a little more. What does it mean to prune? Walk us through what that might practically look like. If someone's saying, yeah, I'm resonating with that, what does that look like practically?
So in some cases, you are actually cutting somebody out, whether that means I'm no longer having one-on-ones with these people, no longer counseling, or blocking them from your feed, or whatever the case is. Not all feedback or input is necessary or good. So making it that sort of tough call of who's speaking into my life, whether intentionally or just by being around, and what impact is that having on me, and do I need to eliminate that in some way? Sometimes it might not be quite that overt, or it might not be a personal connection. It could just be, what are you listening to? Like, are you focused too much on the news source here, or the industry updates here, or the financial readouts there? Why are you doing that? What is the value you're getting from that? If it's information, it's letting you know how to move forward and act. Okay, great. But if it's beyond that, it's now moving into worry, or it's moved into fear, or it's moved into too much of a distraction from where you're trying to go, then maybe that's something you need to cut out that source as well. So you can make those active calls of who's speaking actively and who's speaking more passively into your life. Either way, it's impacting you.
Okay, that's great wisdom and discernment, right? And it's what needs to be pruned, what needs to be either cut out, what needs to be reduced, what needs to be redirected. And I think also too, it's important to be actively growing and looking for leaders that are ahead of you in areas that you want to grow towards, so that you're having that nourishment, if you will, right, from those sources you want to be. So talk about the importance of coaching, the importance of masterminds, the importance of getting into and with groups that are going to pull you forward, so that you're not caught in a vacuum and it's being filled up with something else.
Yeah. Having a coach, someone that is not only your accountability partner, but somebody just to check in and make sure you're moving forward. I think that's huge. Having a person in your life, could be multiple people, who is going to call you on your stuff. If you're doing the wrong thing, it's going to call that out. If you're procrastinating, it's going to call that out. So having a person, I have a coach. I think that's very important to have somebody that's working with you one-on-one. But to your point of like having these masterminds, having these groups, as you are moving forward in your career and in your life and your mission, a lot of times you can be going it alone and feel like I'm trailblazing here, and you feel very far out ahead, and that can be very lonely. And finding support of people that are doing that in other areas, even if it doesn't align with your business, it could be a totally different industry, a totally different area. But a lot of times the problems and challenges that you're facing can be very similar across industries. So finding those people that you can share with, I've found some of the most insightful things that I've experienced of people that have spoken into my life were in industries that had no correlation to what I was currently working on. And almost the ability to not understand the specifics was better, because they're looking at it from a more removed perspective and saying like, well, have you thought about this? Or, oh, that sounds like this. And sometimes we can be too close. So having those groups of people, I think it's fantastic when you can have a group of people that you're interacting with on a regular basis who are also leaders and movers and shakers in their space, but totally different geographies and totally different industries, because you're going to get a wealth of perspectives that you just don't have access to otherwise.
Yeah, there's power in diversification, there's power in diversity, and there's power in just people not being either emotionally attached or physically attached to that industry, right? That could see it from a fresh set of eyes. I think that's so
ties
important.
Us back to that first point about making room for interpretation. It's the same thing in the counselors that you're working with, realizing that somebody could be speaking into your exact issue coming from an entirely different area. But when you make room for that, you can be really blown away with what you get out of it.
Absolutely. By the way, speaking again with Elizabeth Bieniek, you can find her at elizabethbieniek.com. Okay, I promised the listeners that we would get to the book here, right? Which is cool. So tell us about the book. Tell us what it means to have cake on Tuesday.
Sure. So I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast about I spent several years running a startup inside of a large corporation. After that journey, it was such a interesting process that I never actually meant to do. And a lot of times the paths that we take are not always the paths we set out on. But as I was getting to a major milestone in that and handing on off to the next level for productization and stepping away from that, I had a chance to pause and reflect. And I'd been going 100 miles an hour for so long that stopping and thinking, okay, what were my learnings that came out of that? And I started doing it just as a postmortem, kind of a way to capture learnings for myself. And the more I was writing things and capturing things, realizing like this would be really useful for other people too, because a lot of these things I was figuring out as I went through it for the first time. And if I can help somebody else do this, that would be awesome. So they those ideas morph themselves into a book over time. And I then was faced with that choice of, do I want to do this again? Do I want to build another internal startup? Do I want to do this on my own, build my own startup? Or do I run a pivot and help other people do this? And I really landed on that third option of, I would love to take these learnings and experiences and help other people do this in their organizations and in their companies faster and easier than I did, because wisdom is great when you learn from it for yourself, but it's so much better when you can share it with other people. And I love learning from other people's experiences more so than my own, because I can only have so many on my own. So when you can really share that, that was the impetus behind Cake on Tuesday. Now the title Cake on Tuesday is the title. The subtitle is 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation, because it was focused on a entrepreneurial venture. That's why it had the corporate innovation focus. The point of Cake on Tuesday comes from one of the chapters in the book that focus on one season of the project where we didn't have a major milestone to move forward to. We're trying to rally the team to be excited about getting to this next level, but we'd already had this really exciting kickoff, and our first major milestones. The project we were building was very technologically cutting edge, and we didn't know at the beginning if it was technologically feasible. So we'd already gotten to that point. Like, yes, it can be done. Now we're at a point of refining that experience. We weren't yet at a big conclusion either. You're kind of in that slog in the middle. And realizing the need to keep the team excited about, we've been moving so fast at startup pace. How do we inject some of that excitement and levity when right now we're just trying to make these marginal improvements on the process? And I was having a conversation with my then ops manager, and she had this great idea of, what if I make this Wheel of Fortune style, Wheel of Winning, she called it. We put every single person on the project's name on that wheel. At the end of our staff meeting, she would spin it. And if it landed on your name, we would send you a celebratory cake just for fun. And our staff meetings were on Tuesdays, and that's where Cake on Tuesday came from. And it was really a fun motivator for the team to kind of get excited during a season that wasn't particularly exciting.
Okay, I love it. That's really creative and that's fun. And who doesn't love cake? Maybe on Tuesday, right? and that makes for an exciting, encouraging milestones, right? You have rocks, you have the yearly goals, you have all of the things that are associated. But sometimes when you're starting up and you're just getting going on these things, you got to find ways to bring out that excitement and that momentum. I think momentum is a quote that we practice around here at Capital Gains Tax Solutions, the company that I lead, which is momentum is greater than the sum total of all of your leadership, strategy, and resources combined. Right. Yeah. And it's the idea that you go, wow, like if we can create and sustain momentum in a way that keeps it going, keeps the morale going, keeps the energy flowing, right? Like that's the most important thing, right? And hopefully you're all going in the same direction. You're aligned, right? But talk about the value of momentum and how the best are creating and sustaining it.
So my book is broken in 5 sections, and the first 3 are all about starting for exactly that point. Inertia is a real thing. Overcoming inertia and building momentum. It's really hard to get excited and move something forward and get other people excited. And I overly bias my reflections based on that, because I do think momentum is huge. That being said, the last 2 sections are more about once you've built that momentum, how do you protect it? So once the going gets rough, once you start getting a bigger team and you are in danger of losing your culture, once you're so busy now, it's hard to find that time for yourself to pause and make sure you're on track. How do you then protect that and keep that momentum going? So I would say momentum is a common theme in my book, and it's pretty much on 3 parts on starting, getting momentum, and 2 parts on keeping it going.
Okay, cool. I have a couple quotes on this that were not quotes, but just ideas that I've learned from the Greg Kroschel Leadership Podcast. And he talks about it's ignited by vision. So momentum is ignited by vision, right? And then it's sustained by systems, right? Sustained by systems. And it's kind of forged by grit, because and there's a part where it's going to be very, very challenging, and it's going to take that grit factor, right? He also says one other one's, it's fueled by faith, right? So ignited by vision, fueled by faith that it's, hey, this is like, we're doing this for a bigger purpose. We can do it, like the belief. But then once the emotion or the motivation wears off, right, it's sustained by systems. So having the people, processes, and things in place to not have the train go off the tracks, and then it's forged by grit. So, what would you say is the top secret to sustaining momentum, or anything that really sticks out, like a leader can do what today to either, ignite it or sustain it or keep it going?
That idea of a system, I love systems. They're not always the most exciting thing, but they're what makes the world go round. The idea of applying a system to your culture and thinking about your culture as there's a process there. So how do you put a system in place such that your culture is replicated as your team grows and as people change and some leave and others come in? I think that is huge. And one of the biggest reasons organizations as they grow fall apart, because they don't look at their culture as something that needs to be defined with a process and operating guidelines and a system. And because of that, they don't foster it once they've created it. Culture is really hard to create. It's really hard to curate that perfect culture. Once you have it, you have to protect it. You have to make sure that it is set in a way that it can last, because trying to fix a bad culture is even harder than trying to create a good culture, and creating a good culture is hard. So I think looking at it in terms of a system, that's huge. And I actually think a lot of people miss that point.
Okay. That's awesome. That makes sense. So what does that actually look like practically speaking? Like what kind of systems do the best put in place?
I think building it into your operating guidelines, when you have a new person join your team, budding them up with someone who's already there and then walking it through. A lot of times culture is something that, even though you're going to have a system and a template, it comes to life with people. So you always have to have the operating guideline, something you can physically hand to somebody so they can refer back to it. But to come off the page, having somebody walk that and live that for them is huge. So I always like to have a new person be buddied up with a person who's been around for a bit. And part of their focus on bringing them in is like, this is how you fit into this culture and this is how it works, and model it for them. So when we're going to have a team meeting, you're going to have an offsite, you're going to have a project checkpoint, whatever the case is, giving them a heads up of, hey, this is how it's run. And hey, it might look like people are just jumping in and arguing, but realize it's all coming from a point of love, because we're trying to make this idea better. And so we want to hear your opinions. And if it doesn't matter if the most senior person on the team says one thing, if you have a conflicting thought, that's okay. Bring it, because that will be welcome and you'll be respected for it. But you have to hear that from somebody on the ground floor with them. It resonates so much more than reading it in a manual or hearing it tops down. So I think that's a huge piece of it.
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple things, right? So definitely have it written down, right? Your mission, vision, values, right? Their core values, but then immediately assign like a buddy or a team member that's going to help them and actually bring it to life. What's on the page of how they're living it, right? And how they're doing it in their day to day. And then as well as a leader, you're saying, you're kind of giving the overall vision of, this is how your particular skill set can fit into the mission, vision, values, right? And this is how we live it. And is that a fair summary?
Yes, absolutely. I think
and
there's
be intentional about that, right? You got to be, because otherwise you forget.
Right. And realizing that communication, you can't over communicate. It's got to come from all angles and all formats. And people receive communication in different ways. And there's a point where you have to realize, if you're leading an organization, people are going to take what you say differently than how they're going to take it from other people in the organization. So use that to your advantage. There's things that you can say to set the tone, but then have somebody that is coming from a different perspective, a peer, or somebody who's on a project team with somebody, even if it's in a different capacity, saying and really saying, what does that mean? Yeah, you heard this in the mission statement. You heard the boss say this. What does that mean? And explaining that's going to resonate with somebody so much more.
Awesome. I love this. This is great. I'm going to shift a little bit here, get a little bit tactical on some of the exits, right? So if you built a business, part of what we focus on is multiplying freedom and impact when people exit multi-million-dollar businesses, Bitcoin or real estate, and they have these huge capital gains taxes. And so they're exiting. And so we think about sustaining and creating momentum, or maintaining momentum with the wealth that they've accumulated to make an impact. And so clients are either retiring from a business or ready to move on to the next entrepreneurial journey. And so we find that this cap gains tax can crush a lot of the momentum because it can be 20, 30, 40, 50% of their proceeds being wiped out. So I'm curious, what have you found tactically when people are going to exit these big businesses, these things that they've created, to get momentum when it comes to, planning, financial planning, tax planning?
First of all, it should never be a surprise. Your exit should be something you have in mind at the very, very beginning. And I have a downloadable on my website I believe it's titled Executing in Phases, but it talks about it's focused primarily on corporate innovation, but you can apply to it to any project or any business. You should always be looking at everything you're doing as a phase. There's a planning phase, there's an execution part of it, and then there's your exit. And the exit is something that a lot of times people think about it like, once I'm already going, I'll think about how I exit. You need to be thinking about your exit before you start. And so if you are planning with your exit in mind, that is the biggest way to avoid being a momentum killer in the process, because you should always know where it's going, where the outcome is going to be before you even start in your execution. I'm a big fan of planning. I always advocate way more planning than you think you need. Sometimes your planning can be even longer than your execution phase, but that planning should be covering all those details, how you're going to exit, what are the possible outcomes of that exit, and not just exiting the technology or the IP or the business, but how are you exiting your people? Because do you want to take those people with you to the next project and the next company, the next venture? And are you thinking about that right from the get-go too? When you're asking somebody to join your organization, what's their long-term thing? Like, you might be looking, I'm going to do this for 5 years, then have a successful exit and move on and do the next thing. Well, what's the story for them? Do they have the option to come with you? Do they have the option to then, or are you trying to get to a certain point so then they can retire? Do they have the option to roll off and then roll back in? So thinking about exiting your people and every piece of that process, it needs to be your product or IP, your process, and your people. You should be thinking about the exit for all three of those.
Oh, that was so rich. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I have an analogy for this, right? Well, it's not an analogy, it's a reality. Like, imagine, Elizabeth is starting a business, or you, the listener, are starting a business, and then someone was a 20 to 50% owner and or upside owner of what you grow from 0 to 10 or 100 million bucks. You would probably pay pretty close attention if there's a way for you to keep some of that or defer some of that. Right? And well, that's the government. The government's a 20 to 50% owner of all of the upside. They really are, right? Unless you do some planning, and then you can do some planning. You can defer them capturing that ownership or capturing that profit. It's taxes, right? The second most expensive thing that we ever pay in our life. And the first one is the things we don't know. And so you want to know what your exit is. You want to know how your people, your processes, the profits, and you want to plan. And by the way, we wrote a book on this called Building a Capital Gains Tax Exit Plan. And you can find it on Amazon if you want to check that out. But it basically breaks down a journey from clients that have exited highly appreciated assets and businesses. And we break down a solution for that we find it's amazing for entrepreneurs. Check that out on Amazon, Building a Capital Gains Tax Exit Plan. Cool. That being said, you ready for the lightning round?
Let's go.
All right. Knowing what you know now, if you can go back to your first 5 years in let's say the corporate business world, what would you say is the number one thing you would make sure to tell yourself to do?
Nobody knows everything, and most of the people are just winging it.
Okay. Question number 2, what's the number one book you recommend or gifted the most in the past year?
Ooh, that's a good one and a hard one. Shoot, I don't know the exact title of it. There's one that I'm reading right now that is the history of taxes, since the dawn of time. And it goes through Rome and Greece and all these different, and the rise and fall of societies based on taxes. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's a huge book. You might know it, but that's been an awesome book. And I feel like everyone should read this. Why isn't this required reading in high school?
Okay, this is great. I haven't read it, and this is cool. See, I'm learning something every day. I'm going to get the book because I should know that, because this is literally what we do for capital gains tax. Is I wonder if there's a history of capital gains taxes. That'd be cool too.
Right.
Excellent. Question number 2 or 3. What's the number one leadership quote or theme that you strive to live by?
There is a Grace Hopper quote she talks about the whole idea of asking for forgiveness rather than permission. And she just worded it very eloquently. And of course, can't remember on the spot. But that one is something that always resonated with me. And she also has something that she talks about: a ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for.
Oh, that's good. I love that. Next question. What are you most curious about right now?
Ooh. Everything. I have the most eclectic reading list probably you could ever find. And pretty much anything that is new and interesting. I love it when someone is passionate about something, whatever that something is, because I feel like passion is contagious. So anytime somebody recommends something like, this is amazing, you have to read this. All right, let's do it. And it could be an area I have know nothing about, but I find that wildly fun to learn new things.
Love it. Next question. Number one way you use Chat GPT.
I actually used it recently for taking all the chapters and concepts in my book and saying what would be the best things to come out of this to create coursework for. So I'm planning on using that for some things in courses in 2025.
Phenomenal. And let's see, last question. After all your success, helping all the people you've helped, how do you best stay centered in your values and also have a mindset of stewardship over ownership?
I think regularly asking yourself the question, why am I doing this? Just pausing and reflecting on that. I think we're all here for a God-given purpose. And if you can align yourself to why you were put on this earth, what is the purpose that you're here for? And is what you're currently doing aligning to that in some way? If it is, great, do more. If it's not, change.
Beautiful. So great. Elizabeth Bieniek, it's been more than a pleasure to have you on the show. I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom, your heart, your expertise with us. So much great stuff. I want to encourage you to keep using the gifts you've been given, creating order out of chaos and grouping things together, such as people's strengths, people's organizations, to help them make a bigger impact, to have more freedom for the world. For our listeners who want to get in touch with you, one last time, when's the best place for them to find you? And also remind them of your book.
Sure. ElizabethBieniek.com, BIENIEK. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. Follow me there. I'm on Instagram and X at Cake on Tuesday. My book is titled Cake on Tuesday, 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. You can buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you can find a book.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. I also want to thank all of our listeners for listening to another episode of the Build to Billions podcast. We're also streaming on Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast on YouTube channel. And together we're on this journey with you to guide successful entrepreneurs and investors from millions to billions. And we believe that the key to scaling and compounding your wealth starts every single day with the mindset and practice of stewardship over ownership and applying billionaire biblical principles. Again, our ultimate goal is to help you scale and compound your wealth and life so you can give more, all of it away to help MVPs. Please take action today. Please start to build out ways to step away to scale to billions by taking these practical steps that Elizabeth has laid out for us. I want to encourage you to do that. Don't wait. Take action today as well. Of course, check out the book if you're looking to exit a highly appreciated asset, building a capital gains tax exit plan, or go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com to get started today. Appreciate everyone watching or listening, and we will talk to you again real soon. Bye now.